Welcome to the Leading Hope Podcast with Kevin Jack. Your influence will lead people somewhere, lead them towards hope. Everyone has 20 minutes to learn to become a better leader. Make it count.
Welcome to Leading Hope with Kevin Jack. I'm your host, VJ Williams, here with my friend and pastor, Kevin Jack. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day to become a better leader. We will release a new episode every Wednesday, so we'd love for you to subscribe, share on social media, bring others along with us on this journey of becoming a better leader. Visit leadinghope.online to get updates and find more about the Leading Hope community. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are in episode 8 today, and we're finishing up our expectation series. Today's episode is the hardest expectation to set. Kevin, let's go. Let's hear about this.
This is going to be so much fun.
All right.
This is the episode that we just step on everyone's toes.
Yes.
But the hope is this is not that we convict you, but that we empower you to live your life at a higher level. And as what this entire podcast is all about is that your leadership, your influence is going to have an impact. You can lead people towards despair or towards hope. We want you to lead people towards hope. And so today we're going to talk about the idea of the hardest expectation to set. And it has to do with the expectations and the follow-through that you set for yourself. So before we jump into that, let's recap just a little bit. We understand that our lives are the product of our thoughts. Our lives are the product of our actions, and our actions are the product of our thoughts. And so our lives are the product of our thoughts. So if we have low expectations of our lives, yes, we won't be disappointed, but we will also not accomplish anything significant. We won't seize the opportunities that are there because we won't be aware of them. And so we need to cultivate a high level of expectation, which was what episode 6 in this podcast, the second one of this series, was all about. And we've talked about that for our organizations, for our families, for our teams, for our businesses, for all those different things, that we need to have that high level of expectation, and we need to cultivate and clarify those expectations to those around us. But I want to get really personal with you on this. And I just want to talk directly to you. This doesn't apply to anyone else. You are not allowed to apply this to anyone else. We want you to share this episode, but this is not the episode that you share with someone around you like, hey, the entire time I was listening to this, I was really thinking about you. I think you need to hear this because you are the one who needs to hear this, because I know I am the one who needs to hear this. And so I want to ask it in this context. If you were the manager of you, if you were the boss of you, when it came to your relationships, when it came to your finances, when it came to your health, when it came to your, least importantly, work and your professional life. If you were the boss of you and you had the expectations that you had set for you, the ways in which you would behave, the ways in which you would act, the level of energy that you would bring, what would boss of you say to you? What would the manager of you in all of your life say about you and the level in which you're living? Because this is the thing, if we're not careful on this, we'll apply this in the ways of our lives that are least important, and we'll cultivate high levels of expectation for our companies. We'll cultivate high levels of expectation for our organizations. We'll cultivate high levels of expectation for our churches, but we will never cultivate and then apply that high level of expectation for ourselves. And years will go by, and our health will decline, and our debt will increase, and we will not do the things that we know we need to do that matter most in our lives. And we will consistently make excuses. And it is amazing the ways in which we can see through so clearly the excuses of others. And we can see through so clearly the ways in which other people are making exceptions for their poor behavior, their poor energy, their poor actions, and their poor attitudes. We can see that so clearly. And yet we will believe any lie we tell ourselves in order to get out of the things we know we should be doing. We will create artificial barriers in the form of every excuse possible for why we're not healthier, why we're not developing personally, why we're not more relationally connected. We will, within relationships in which there's conflict, we will blame others instead of taking action ourselves. We will play the victim and be the martyr for all of our poor relationships instead of owning responsibility. And as we talk about this, we know that's not the life that we've been called to live. We know that's not what we're supposed to be doing. And we know the expectations that we have set for ourselves, but we continuously wiggle our way out of it to excuse a lower standard of living. And so my brother-in-law does some different executive coaching with different groups. And he talks about this. He says we need 3-level thinking. And his is in the context of small businesses, and we'll talk about that for just a second. But I want us to apply this personally. So he says we need 3-level thinking. We need to think at the level of the frontline employee, the manager, and the CEO. And so if you're a small business owner, this will make perfect sense. You are all 3 of these occupations. You have to play all 3 of these roles. If you're not careful, you'll only live at the level of the frontline employee. The frontline employee is responsible for how they're doing something. The manager is a level removed. They're responsible for what they're doing. The CEO is responsible for why. And so we look at those 3 different levels: frontline employee, manager, and CEO. What, how, what, and why, in that order. And it's important to understand that if your small business is going to succeed, you must be able to play all 3 roles well. You cannot abdicate the role of CEO because you're doing so much on the ground work. You cannot abdicate the role of manager, who is enforcing and holding yourself accountable for the actions that you're doing because you're so busy. And we need to take a similar role in our lives, in our relationships, within our work, within our health, within all these other things. We need to do the things that we're doing. We need to hold ourselves accountable for the things that we're doing. And we need to constantly take that broader perspective of looking at why we are doing the things that we're doing in the way that they're doing to begin with. And so by taking hold of those 3 different roles, what we do is we remove our excuses. We reduce our ability to fall short of the expectations that we have set for ourselves, and we constantly reorient and align our lives around the purposes with which we want to live. And so that question that I want to ask you, I think, is the most important one, is how are you doing at managing you? If you were the manager of you, would you fire yourself? If you were the manager of you, what would you say to yourself? Would you say that's a legitimate reason and let's regroup, recalibrate, and try again? Or would you say you're constantly making excuses as to why you're living short of your own expectations? And so the piece within there that I just want to press into you is, yes, have a high expectation. Have a high level of expectation for yourself. Believe that you're going to follow through on the things that you have set out to do. Believe that you are going to accomplish significant things, but don't accept every excuse that comes into your head. Go, no, I expect more from myself. I expect better from myself. And that's the only way that I'm going to live at the level that I believe I was created and want to live into.
Fantastic. Man, the hardest expectation to set. We could, you know what, let's just, let's go here with this. This should be fun. You said we need to follow through for our organizations, teams, families. It's a must, but so is the follow through that we set for ourselves, which is absolutely correct. So let's just get real.
Okay.
What is boss of Pastor Kevin saying to Pastor Kevin?
Boss of Pastor Kevin for a couple years. So this is what I know about myself. I know that I am sharpest, I am thinking best when I am constantly learning and developing, which, to be honest, is partially why we created this podcast.
Yes.
Is many of the leadership podcasts that I listened to and wanted to listen to were too long for me to actually, it was only during the summer when I was cutting the grass that I actually had the time available to go through them. And so I know that I'm sharpest when I'm reading, when I'm thinking, when I'm developing, when I'm learning. And I went through a season, it was probably 18 months, and this was a rare thing for me, where I wasn't reading hardly at all. I wasn't listening.
It's very rare for you.
It was. But I wasn't listening to anything that was growing me, and I wasn't sharp in my thinking. I was dull. I was not aggressive in terms of the things that I should be aggressive on. I was very lethargic and very laid back because that development is what keeps me at my best. And I had every excuse in the world for why I wasn't. Because, and my excuses are good, Vij.
Yeah.
Like, ready? Like,
I'm ready.
I had a large church that I was not prepared to lead within there, that I had never led at this level. So there was the complication of figuring out, how do I lead at this level with many staff members and all this other stuff. I have 4 small children, and Vij, no one has time to read when you have 4 small children.
That's true.
It's a misuse of my role as a father if I'm reading when I have 4 small children, books other than The Cat in the Hat and The Very Hungry Caterpillar and all those other things.
Good books.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And at some point in time, I just said, you know what, I can't let this go. So I did something really, really simple, is I just started waking up at 5 in the morning. You know what the beauty is I don't have babies anymore. My kids aren't up at 5 in the morning. Now, they're up early, but they're not up at 5 in the morning. And if I was going to have time, and you would go, well, I'm more of a night owl. I tried that, and I found that my 10:30, 11 o'clock time is never spent reading.
Yeah.
It is always spent watching TV.
Yep.
And I wasn't going to wake up at 5 in the morning to watch SportsCenter. I'm not that maniacal. I love myself some SportsCenter, but that's a sickness if you're waking up hours early just to watch SportsCenter.
Agreed.
And so I finally got to a point in time where manager me said, I'm just making excuses not to do the thing that I need to do. While it may be uncomfortable, while it may be not fun for a period of time, I need to do the thing that will keep me sharp. And so 5 in the morning is where it was at.
That leads me right into my next question, which I think is great. You were talking about when basically what you just said. We create artificial barriers and sometimes flat out lies to let ourselves.
I can't because.
Right,
I can't
right,
because.
Right. Flat out lies to ourselves to let ourselves off the hook for the expectations we as leaders set.
Yes.
We're the actual creating our own demise.
Yep.
And so when this begins to happen, how are we first aware that it's happening, and second, remove it and reverse its course?
Well, I think one of the things, and we may have talked about this some, eventually we'll do a month on this, on creating a life intentionally, is you have to be crystal clear on the life that you expect to live, and crystal clear from the point that it is not just a clear vision in your head, but I believe you actually have to document it. I believe you actually have to get it on paper and say, this is who I want to be. This is who I intend to be. We create vision statements for organizations and churches, but for some reason we fail to create vision statements for ourselves and the life that we're intentionally cultivating. And so this is the one practice that I did have, is I had that written down. I had written down that I wanted to keep learning. I had written down that I knew I needed to keep developing. Now, the confession within there is for 18 months I looked at that and made excuses for why I wasn't. But the fact that I kept looking at it eventually made me sick of myself enough to do something about it and to no longer buy into those excuses.
That's good. I wanted to ask a question about the 3-level thinking. And I don't have a perfect question formulated right now, but you talked about owner, manager, and frontline. As a leader, you need to have that 3-level thinking. Is there any one particular one of those that, as a leader of an organization, not necessarily a team, but an organization? So if someone's listening who's leading an organization like our church and some of those things, one of those that stands out that they really need to pay more attention to?
Yeah.
Because I think for me, it would be easy for me to say I own this, right?
Yeah.
But maybe that's too easy, and maybe I actually need to get on the front line to see what actually is happening.
Yeah, so let me talk about from this context of the ownership of the CEO within there is massively important, and the ownership of the CEO is what will dismiss excuses more than anything else. But I believe that we all gravitate towards doing instead of evaluating. And one of the things we've been really clear with our staff is we say, hey, we are servant leaders, so we do what is necessary, but you are paid to lead, not to do, because leading is harder than doing. It is much easier just to do a task than to lead people forward. And so here's my guess. My guess is that for most of us, if we're abdicating a role, we're abdicating the roles of CEO, and maybe most in particular is we're abdicating the role of manager. Is we'll have lofty statements on purpose and we'll do, but we're not actually doing that middle role that's holding people accountable for actions. And so I think if we're going to excuse ourselves out of it, is we're excusing ourselves out of that middle role. Because
I think that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, to come up with a big vision statement is fun. To do is necessary, and we have to get it done. But I'd much rather make excuses than hold myself accountable.
That's good. Here's a question for you right off the top. I always hear this statement, so I want to ask you of your opinion of this statement. It's more of a question, not a statement. It says, people, do you believe leaders are generally their biggest critic?
Do I believe leaders?
Do you think leaders in general, because we always say leaders are their own biggest critic. Is that a true statement?
Well, I would say it is for the most part, except if you're a pastor, then you always have a couple loud critics who are on the fringes of your congregation.
That's
no
interesting.
Names, nothing else within there. I'll just share that within there. But this is why. Because I believe there's a healthy thing within there. As leaders are their own worst critic. And that's why they're leaders.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly evaluating and they're not allowing themselves to excuse their poor performance or their poor behavior over and over again. That's why they rose to that level of significance and influence, is because while people with a lower level of expectation for themselves are fine with excuses, fine with, well, I couldn't do anything about that. I created this artificial barrier, which artificial barrier is this. It is because of this and this and this, I can't do that. Because of this and this and this is not a good season and that doesn't work for me. I'm not that personality. I'm not that Enneagram number. I'm not that temperament, whatever that reason is. And so the people who are their own worst critics, not in a depressing way,
right,
but who are constantly evaluating, will naturally rise to leaders because they won't allow themselves excuses.
Yeah, I love the point you made, and we covered this in our very first episode, Why is Resilience Important? It's the very first one we did, and it was like, you're a leader for a reason.
Yep.
Like, you're a leader because there's a problem.
There's a reason you get paid.
Yeah, and so that kind of fits right into this, set this expectation for yourself. The reason I asked that question is because I think sometimes maybe as leaders, we may use that as the excuse, well, I am my biggest critic. And so you set in that instead of actually just overcoming it.
Yes.
I think that's something that happens to quite a few of us who are trying to accomplish the vision. I've got about 2 minutes here left. Is there anything else that you want to talk about in episode 8 as we end this most important expectation series and we talk about the hardest expectation to set?
So let's jump back into that idea of expectation as a whole. Years ago, read a book by Marcus Buckingham and read many books by Marcus Buckingham, but he's talking about the difference between leadership and management. And in the book is The One Thing you need to know about all these other things. And he talks about the skill of the manager is the manager plays chess instead of checkers. The manager sees each person for their individual gifts and strengths and abilities. But he said the leader is an optimist. And that's the most important skill that a leader has, is that a leader is an optimist. And so the thing that we need to talk about is when we're talking about expectations, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about seeing the world for what it could be, always seeing the best in people, in organizations, in the world as a whole. And so if you lose that high level of expectation, the most significant thing you can do is get it back. Figure out what you need to do. Start your day inspired. Every Tuesday is when I write a sermon. If I start that with low energy, if I start that thinking, oh, this message is going to stink, it's going to stink.
Yes.
Before I ever research, I have to ensure that I start inspired. What that looks like for you is going to be unique to you, but you have to maintain that high level of expectation if you're going to lead towards hope.
That's where we'll leave it today. I will say this. We have a shirt here, and it kind of just says The Optimist that you said. We have a shirt that says, believe there is good in the world, but the believe is actually kind of hidden behind some text that says be the good in the world. And I think that's exactly what expectation is. It's on you to set that, to be what you want others to be.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
fantastic. You guys have a great week. Make sure that you share this on social media, that you're talking to your friends and family who are leaders. And if you don't actually have to be a leader to listen to this podcast, it is obviously great for your families, for your, your friendships, everything about life. There's a lead that you take a part in. Like Kevin says, we're leading people towards hope. And so make sure that you share this every week. We can't wait to join you back for episode 9. Next week, it's going to be fantastic. Join us. You guys have a great week. Bye.